Hey there everybody, my name is Snitch. Welcome back to another episode of CO Select. Now, today's map might look quite interesting, because it's actually the first game I've ever played on Advance Wars by Web in Fog of War. This is a tier 1 match. My opponent is Dr. Thrax. We're playing on the map 1 versus 1 Okahazama. This is one of the infamous Ouija maps. I think it's Ouija. I'm not sure, but yeah, one of the many Fog of War maps that populates the league. But yeah, this is actually my first foray into Fog of War, and a lot of you guys have been asking for it. Lots of requests for me to post some Fog reviews, and obviously I didn't have any yet, but I've actually played, maybe like 10 games on Fog now. Just queued up for a few one day. I normally play about 15 games at a time, so I just turned on Fog for like one day on my global league matching, and it popped about 10 games instantly. So I played a lot of Fog for a couple of days. So I do definitely have a few replays that are pretty interesting to watch if you guys are more interested in Fog content. Definitely more on the way. But yeah, so I'm playing Von Bolt. Von Bolt has a day-to-day with 10% additional firepower and defense. Obviously very difficult to deal with. Especially defense in Advance Wars, very, very powerful. Stationing units on cities makes them pretty much unbeatable. As some of the astute of you may have noticed, my opponent's actually playing Lash, which is not a tier 1 CO. So this match is not totally fair, I'd say pretty much from the beginning. But at the same time, it was my first Fog match, and I felt like some of you guys would be interested in just seeing like kind of the ideas I was trying and different ways I was kind of approaching the game and some of the things I was thinking about when playing this game, and it's also like a good record for me, I suppose, of like starting with how I started in Fog and maybe how I improve in the future. So yeah, my opponent is playing Lash. Lash's day to day, she gets an additional 10% bonus firepower for every terrain star her units have on the tile they're sitting on. So for example, on cities, they have 3 terrain stars. Lash deals an additional 30% damage from cities. Pretty strong for her indirects. Pretty strong at holding cities as well, to be honest. Like compared to Von Bolt as well. Obviously, Von Bolt gets more defense, which is a bit harder to deal with compared to firepower. But Lash gets very strong initial strikes from cities, and it's very hard to fight her units on cities, especially when they can reinforce and switch out with another unit. She gets a big counterattack. Von Bolt's super is Ex Machina. Does a two square missile. It does 3 damage and disables all of the units hit for the opposing turn. And Lash's powers, her CO power is Terrain Tactics, which just gives her units reduced movement penalty on all tiles. So all of the movement penalties are reduced to 1. Traditionally, you won't go for this one, but it means that she can do stuff like, move infantry through mountains really fast, or move wheel units across a lot of terrain, I suppose. Not exactly very relevant often, but a little bit more relevant in Fog, I suppose, where recons are running around a little bit more often. But mainly you want to save up for Prime Tactics, which is her super, which doubles the terrain stars of all of her units, basically, of the squares that they're sitting on. So, for example, on a city, she will get 6 terrain stars, and this means, obviously, her day-to-day will give her 60% bonus firepower, as well as pretty much making it so the opponent can take no aggressive attacks against her on the next turn on defensive tiles. Forests become as strong as HQs, plains become as strong as forests. It's only like roads and bridges and shoals and these kind of tiles that don't really get any effect. But anything else, like especially HQs, become 8 terrain stars. It's just impossible. So generally, her super is a good way to delay a turn as well. Not only do you get a turn of really strong offense, you also get a turn of prohibiting your opponent to get solid attacks. However, as Lash's day-to-day and her powers are quite conditional, she is traditionally seen as not much of a high-tier CO. I believe she normally sits around tier 3. Not 100% sure for Fog if that's different. I wouldn't imagine it is, because I don't think she gains any real additional bonuses. But, Von Bolt just naturally is a much stronger CO, so I would say this matchup is pretty unfair in favor of my opponent. I said, like, it is in favor of me. For my opponent, it is quite unfair. But like I said, this was my first Fog game, and I definitely wanted to do a review of it. Just kind of see how I played and the differences, the different choices I made as a result, and then just stuff that I retroactively, like having played more Fog, what would I have done differently, So I just think it'd be interesting. So anyway, let's get straight into the game. After I talk about the map, saved it. So yeah, this map is kind of interesting. I would say it's a bit weird where the divide is. I think it's fairly easy to get to this southern area or the northern area for player 2, whereas you know these central properties are kind of up in the air. But I think it's a little bit easier to reinforce this top side, maybe if you're player 2 as opposed to being player 1. There's these shoaled airports that you do get an initial black boat to reach. That is something to consider. You also get this free recon to spy out the comm towers. As the map isn't, like I said, it's not really firmly decided, I think, where the line is. You could definitely play for this side or just play south. I think it's just kind of up to the players, but you know, there's 2 or 3 interesting fronts where armies could clash. But this recon gives you a little bit more information, maybe, if your opponent is like trying to rush the tower, maybe, or play for this tower, which, because of the terrain, I think is a little bit harder to access in some ways, but it is probably your tower. I mean, I think the towers are probably more contestable, but I think like these properties, for example, would all go to Black Hole, and these ones would generally go to me. And then you kind of push for your opponent's tower. You know, you end up trading towers with me. I don't know. It's definitely an interesting map, and it does play out kind of similarly to how I'm talking. But yeah, I think the divide is really weird on this map, and I need to definitely play it more to get a better grasp of what you should actually be aiming for or trying to push. So anyway, let's just get straight into the review. So I'm day 1, classic double infantry. I'm with my black boat here, ready to pick up an infantry so I can get moving. I did actually look up, I think I looked up some of the openings on this map. That's a really good habit to get into, is if you're playing a new map and you don't really know what you want to do on it, a really good thing you could do is just look it up. Just look up a better replay and see what the better players did. So my opponent goes for the 2 infantry build, moves out. The black boat actually is not on a shoal here, so their black boat will not be usable until next turn. I'm already loading into the black boat, going out for these you know, forward properties, getting this infantry position to start chaining through all of these. Start moving out my other infantry. My opponent's second day, get an infantry up on the mountains, getting ready to capture the port. They now move the black boat onto the shoal and load, but it's kind of like it's kind of like a turn late, you know? They could have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, I guess there's nowhere to get here, so you probably just go from this base if you want to do it. I think it's just kind of inefficient movement from my opponent. A little bit behind on the black boat usage. Start capturing, pull my boat back, getting ready to pick up more infantry. Pick up my first recon on day 3. Now, this is kind of something I thought was kind of a normal thing to do, but upon talking to some other players and then going over it more, it seems like day 3 recon is actually deemed to be quite aggressive and risky, especially on maps where you're probably not going to be harassing captures. It can generally be better even just to forgo recons entirely until later in the game where you start, you know, doing pushes and maybe pressing forwards with vision is more necessary. So yeah, definitely not sure if I would go for this recon play in hindsight. I definitely had games since here where I've not gone for early recons and I just mass infantry. And then my opponent who's committing to like these early recons and vehicles and stuff like this ends up falling quite far behind on the capture game. And eventually I just have like a much bigger unit count of more like, you know, relevant troops, I guess. Because recons also fall off quite aggressively once tanks get involved as well. So they're really only useful if you really want to harass your opponent in the early game. So I think that is something to consider. I've definitely started foregoing the aggressive day 3 recon a little bit more. My opponent also builds a recon though, so we are matching. Both go for the aggressive recon. Loading more infantry into my black boat. My opponent brought their infantry down here. Let's go for the aggressive captures. None of us have moved for the airport yet. No real need to. At some point you do want to commit to the airport, but you don't want to go too early, because it is only 1 infantry tile, and the other problem is you probably end up burning the infantry, because you don't really want to have your black boat sitting around there waiting all the time. You want to keep it moving. So a lot of the times you will end up leaving the infantry on the airport section. This isn't a shoal, right? I was going to say, I was just checking you couldn't get there, and I'm just a complete idiot, but I'm not. Moving my infantry back, black boat in position again. Recon's walking forwards, trying to get some scouting. I am going to be pushing forward kind of aggressively with this. The thing about the recons in the early game is generally they're pretty uncontestable because tanks don't normally come out that fast, especially if your opponent builds a recon. The problem being is if my opponent did forego the recon, they would have a tank this turn. So that's kind of like the concern, right? It's like, yes, you can get this like vision advantage, or you can scout your opponent, and definitely on some maps the recon information can be very valuable in the early game. Our opponent actually goes for an APC build here, which is pretty interesting. But you do have to consider like the unless you're getting these aggressive punishes on infantry, you might not get much value out of this recon. And even if you are getting the punishes, if they don't build a recon themselves, they can have a tank advantage, and then your recon could get a blast anyway. So it could even be dangerous to play aggressive. So I definitely see like the downfalls of the day 3 recon. I actually spot my opponent's blackbow here. Obviously, I can't see if it's loaded, but I could assume that they're actually going pretty aggressively for the tower. It's kind of like the value of this pre-deployed recon. It's pretty cool. I kind of like this mechanic. I end up pushing up for my airport, moving my other infantry forwards. Still capturing these southern properties. My opponent's a little bit behind in this regard. I think it's mostly because of the way they use their blackbow. Like, I've had a little bit more offensive blackbow movement. My opponent is getting 1 capture this turn, and I'm getting 2 more next turn. And they actually won't be able to start any cities this turn, I think. There's no properties that they're in position to start. So I'm actually like quite ahead of the capture game so far. And then moving their recon up here, they missed mine entirely. Mine is in a forest, but I think I would see theirs. I don't remember if I actually watched the replay, but I think I know that there's a recon up here. I mean, I should know, but you know, it depends where I checked the replay or if I was watching in real time. We were playing this fairly real-timey for a while, but not sure if it finished. Both sides do get out of the first tank. I just want to point out here that my opponent actually base skipped because they only had 7,000. This is kind of because they built the APC. Already a big no-no is falling behind on the unit count. They are getting a lot of transports out, which will help them push out for contested properties, but they are already kind of like losing in unit count as a result. Because my opponent even went second this game, which means they started with an additional infantry, and they're already 1 behind, which means they're actually 2 behind, I think, right? So that's pretty drastic, actually. Not sure whether they missed the other one. But yeah, they've definitely missed like at least 1 build, which is a pretty unfortunate mistake. Loaded 2 infantry into this blackbow, getting ready to move up to this northern section. Just still pushing out, capturing properties, move my recon even more aggressively. Start seeing a lot of infantry, but it's a little bit dangerous for me to hit at this point because, yeah, this should be the tank turn. Considering I got a tank out last turn, I can be pretty confident my opponent should have one as well. I end up picking up a recon, another infantry. Pretty stock standard stuff. My opponent gets trapped by my aggressive recon. Tank moves forward. They actually move the tank into my vision range, and this is kind of another mistake, I think. Because it reveals the info to me that I shouldn't necessarily have or have the right to. My opponent already found this recon, and you can triple click on AWW to reveal the vision range. It's a really handy feature. Definitely recommend you make use of it, especially if you're playing Fog. So if I triple click my recon, you can see the yellow squares, how far my recon can see. And you could check this, and this tank easily could have sat maybe on this silo tile, where, you know, it's very safe, and it's right outside of my vision. And I might have thought, oh, there's just a bunch of infantry here. You know, they could even move the infantry up and just ignore the recon. And I'd be like, wow, that's pretty disrespectful. Maybe I'll hit some of these infantry. And then suddenly I'm within a tank range, you know? So I think it's definitely something to consider, and something you should always do is be playing around vision ranges and considering the vision ranges of your opponent when moving your army. And that's part of why recons can be so important for pushing. Because you want to get as much intel as you can, especially on the positions of your opponents, whether they have indirects, whether it's safe to walk forwards, all this kind of stuff. But yeah, you definitely want to never make this mistake of walking into vision for just no reason. You know, there's no reason that I should be privy to this information. This tank should be totally hidden. I can assume my opponent has a tank. Like I said, I would be thinking they should have a tank by now. I have a tank. You know, I should have seen this recon. I can assume they're on the same build line as me, which means they should have a tank this turn. Assuming that the capture phase is matching mine. Obviously, they did base skip to get it, but they still got the tank. But I shouldn't know for sure. I should have to make a calculated guess. And it's definitely a mistake by my opponent to give me this information for free. So just starting more captures, Blackbird's moving back. APC moving forward. So yeah, they do kind of do this, right? Where they disrespect the recon, and I'm thinking, well, you know, if I didn't know this tank was here, I might hit one of these. I don't think I would, but I definitely would consider it more, not knowing there's a tank in range to counterattack anything I hit, right? Another APC goes out for my opponent. Lots of aggressive transport building. Definitely also a bit of a mistake, I think. Like, you already have this blackbow to get around the map. I think transports are a little bit more useful in Fog because your opponent doesn't know. So they do have a little bit more value as a result because they aren't as aware that you're building transports to rush out aggressive properties, right? You can get a bit more value in that regard, because unlike in Standard, where if I see an APC, I'm like, well, they're gonna go for the central properties, I could just build tanks and hold them, and, you know, the APC is wasted. I'm not aware that they're building transports to rush out great aggressive cities. You don't know what cities your opponent is contesting. You don't know what cities your opponent is going to rush and try and hold, right? And even if you do end up seeing the city after they've got it, you don't know what they have there to necessarily hold it. You can make some judgment calls of, oh, maybe they built an APC, maybe they skipped some cities to get to this one, right? They should only have this much money. This is definitely all stuff you could do. But you can't be as sure. But I do think 2 APCs is a lot of APCs. Definitely don't need that much. And I already see that they have one. So I have already spotted one, which means that I know that my opponent is committing a lot of income to transports. So I can already be kind of sure that I at least have either a vision advantage through recons or a tank, you know, advantage soon. Because my opponent's committing a lot of money to vehicles that are just purely utility. So I end up moving this tank up here. I do actually end up moving into the vision range of the recon, but I don't know it's there, obviously, so I can't be sure. My opponent will see my first tank here. I think I was just covering these infantry, but I could have covered it more defensively, probably. I just wasn't sure how deep this recon was, but I do think I did see it in the replay. I knew it was there. Double tank build for me this turn. Definitely had a big capture advantage. My opponent's played quite a sloppy capture game so far, but I think it's generally just due to less efficient black boat usage. Recon comes over here on the left. Still haven't seen it for a while now. The black boats are starting to run out of fuel. My opponent's also making the mistake of the way they position their APCs. You don't want to put the APC here and load into the APC on the same turn. What you want to do is go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example. Move your infantry here. And then the next turn you can load and get a full APC's move on the same turn. So this is just also quite inefficient transport usage from my opponent in general. They also did it earlier with the black boat, where they were moving the black boat in a certain way. Where loading on the black boat and then moving it the next turn, but you can always get more value out of like putting your transports and infantry's move away, or at least as high as you can away from the transport. So on the following turn, the infantry can then walk into the transport can move the max distance, and you're getting a much bigger effective move than you are having transports waiting for infantry. So it's always something you should think about. I do see this infantry down here, because I have the infantry in the forest. See all these units here. I see the tank go into the forest here, so I know where it is. When I'm moving up with the APC, reveals my recon in the woods. Not a big deal, because tank's already moved. Didn't have the range anyway. They built a second tank and another infantry. So I'm actually 3 tanks to 2 now. Moving up for the comm tower, moving my recon up, trying to scout out this area, see if they're making an offensive push maybe. They've actually captured them comm tower. Obviously I know this because I have the pre-deployed recon. I go for the hit here on this. I think I get the 2 hit, yeah. I felt like, worst case, my opponent's gonna be like moving the APC awkwardly to reveal the recon. Like, I was thinking more about vision range here. I think it's definitely a bit of a greedy attack. Maybe I wouldn't go for it. But I was thinking like, it's really, you know, my opponent's capturing this city. They have this APC here. This infantry is in a position to move. So if they want to hit this recon back, it has to be like APC into the woods, tank comes down, hits the recon. It's still useful for my opponent, but it just felt like it'd be kind of an awkward move for them, I guess is how I felt in the moment. I think I might move this tank over as well to cover, maybe. Do have this tank moving down on the south. This tank's moving out. My black boat's moving up with the 2 infantry in it. Running out of fuel, sadly. Actually, I just ended up moving the tank to the woods. I could definitely move the tank over here to cover. I think I was like here, right? I could have gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I'm within range to counterattack a tank, but it's still pretty deep. So I think it's just too greedy an attack on my end. But yeah, I do feel like it's awkward for my opponent to get the hit anyway, so I guess I wasn't super upset about it. I actually built my first copter here. My opponent hasn't gone for the airport yet, in fact, which is pretty interesting. They might not do it. No, they should go for it now, right? Because they've got the black boat back here. So they are pretty behind me on the air game. But obviously I can't know that. It's always quite interesting, because you don't know how early your opponent's gone for the airport. They could already have had a copter at this point, for all I know. It might even be a bit too greedy for me to not have built an anti-air already. Just, you know, in case. It's always an interesting aspect of Fog of War, is that you do have to build, not only do you have to build to guess what your opponent has done or will do, you also have to build to kind of like, you know, just in case. You need like countermeasures, right? Stuff like anti-air can be very important on maps like this where there is an airport that's fairly accessible. I think I'm pretty confident that my opponent doesn't have copters yet in this game, because I've seen 1 APC and 1 tank. It'd be quite awkward for them to have also got a copter out. So I think I'm fairly confident in this specific scenario, but yeah, in general, you know, you do have to be considerate of stuff like airports with regards to do you have anti-air ready in case you end up just getting suddenly run down by a bunch of copters. That's happened to me in a game recently. I don't know if I reviewed this one, but I had a game against somebody who actually said they were a viewer of the channel, and they ended up having, you know, we were taking like fights on my side of the map. I was feeling pretty good about the fights, and then suddenly they had like 4 copters in reserve that they'd just been building up, and I had no idea, and I just got completely caught off guard, and I couldn't build any countermeasures in time, so I ended up having to forfeit. So it's definitely like a lesson you have to learn. A recon attack on my infantry does 4 damage, just Von Bolt things. My opponent's moving up for these northern cities, so they actually end up moving here. I think they did this the wrong way around. If they put the APC in the forest and the tank in the city, they would have got an OCO. So that's a bit of a blunder for my opponent, but I would have lost a recon for nothing there, so definitely a pretty inefficient attack on my end. Just to delay 1 capture doesn't really seem worth it. But my opponent does make the mistake of putting these units the wrong way around. Whereas if they do it the other way, they would have one-shot my recon with the Lash firepower bonus. They do end up building an anti-air. This is what I'm talking about, right? Predictive building. My opponent is just starting to capture my airport. Maybe they thought I'd already have mine. They should build an anti-air just in case. And they were totally right. So great build from my opponent here. They actually ended up building the anti-air in the same turn that I built a copter, which is pretty much ideal. So I moved my recon up, go for aggressive attacks on this infantry. I saw this recon back here, so I felt pretty confident that this was kind of overextended and that these units were not very well defended. Yeah, because I know the other tank is here, right? So even if my opponent's built a second tank, it wouldn't have been the turn after, it would be the turn after that. So yeah, it's just started moving now, right? This is the turn that the tank has moved. So it shouldn't be in range to cover these units. So I felt pretty confident about getting some attacks onto the infantry here. Start capturing these cities. Drop off my my two penguins. My Blackbird's at 5 fuel. It's really unfortunate because I don't think I could capture this and move it at the same time, and I think they even end up harassing me off the port or something, so I can't end up saving my Blackbird, so I do end up losing it, which was quite sad. Moving my 2 tanks down here, move my recon back. Survives on 1 HP. You always want to preserve low HP recons if you can. No point sacking them for offense or anything, because obviously the intel and the 5 vision is very valuable, so it's always better to try and preserve them and keep them darting around forests and stuff, if possible. I built my first anti-air here, you know, I've just got my copter out. It's definitely plausible my opponent has one as well. That's what I'm talking about, predictive building. Being ready for the options your opponent could take. This infantry moves down for the port, I see it. Like I said, they harass me from the port for the bonus, taking infantry to 1 HP. I do have this tank in range though. Did they have the vision of this tank? I think so, right? So let me just check. Yeah, so they did have vision of the tank, so they end up just going for the harass anyway. I've kind of trapped to this recon, you know, there's not much you can do, so I think my opponent's just ready to sack it. They just go for more harass on infantry, trying to be a pain. The APC doesn't move it down, this infantry's moving forwards. This APC's actually just scouting, I guess. It doesn't have any units loaded in it, so I'm not sure why my opponent is aggressively posturing with the APC necessarily. It's kind of strange. And yeah, they end up moving more units up here, build another tank, start capturing the airport. My next turn, go for the hit on this recon, 2 HP, finish my comm tower in the wrong order, because I'm really good at the game. End up just using this infantry to block it off, preventing it from running away. Just want to take this out and limit the amount of information it can gather. So I go for this cap, didn't know the infantry was here off the APC. I also trapped my recon accidentally, which is just 2 aggressive movements, then I trap my other infantry. Like, it's kind of just, it's still something I'm getting used to, where you really have to limit how far you will push out, because your opponent is just as likely to use the woods as you are, and they will often want to, you know, control the woods on their side. So a lot of the times you really have to just be cautious, I think, with your movement is something I've learned, and you kind of just have to accept that you can only go so far and still be safe. Because this is kind of a disastrous position, though I don't even know it yet. There's a tank in range of this infantry. This recon's gonna get blasted, and it's all because I moved it too far forwards. I could have just kept it in this forest and had all the information I needed, but I just got too greedy for an aggressive move. Now obviously there's sides to this, right? Sometimes you get the aggressive move off, and that can be a really big deal, because then you have this really great aggressive forward position. And that could definitely happen, but it's definitely more of a coin flip that you need to take, and in a scenario like this, I'm going to get punished extremely hard. Move my tank up into the forest here. I could have gone for a first strike on this tank, but I don't know how many units my opponent has behind it, but I could have set it up with some infantry movement. I move my recon back into this woods here. It's, you know, it's 1 HP, chilling in the woods, giving me information, get myself trapped again. move up with my tank to hit this APC and finish it off. Just taking out the free unit. You know, I've got a copter here covering as well in case the tank moves down, tries to get some hits. And I've also got this tank up here in the woods in the center, covering that area. Moving my next infantry forward, build a tank and an artillery. Just an efficient build, because I only had 1300. And having an artillery at some point, especially in fog, can be pretty useful, I think. I've definitely been experimenting with artillery a lot more lately than I used to, because I just didn't really know how to use them well. I still don't think I use them amazingly, but I use them a bit better than I used to, and a lot of my games are slowing down more nowadays, where they're less about finding advantages in the early game, and much more about kind of building up these big armies and walls and pushing forward slowly and getting small advantages. And in those kind of scenarios, artillery are a lot more effective than the kind of like hectic, aggressive tank games I was playing before. So I have kind of had to like learn them a little bit. So my opponent's finishing some captures. They go for the interrupt on this infantry, get a first strike, get a 2-hit KO on that infantry, end up losing that one for nothing basically. Gonna lose another infantry here. Anti-air moving forward to cover for copters. They've got another recon coming up. Yep, they get the first strike on the recon, like I said. Does manage to survive on 1 HP again. I guess that's the, yeah. Once again, if this was in a city, I would die, but Von Bolt recons are a little bit tankier than the normal, even against a 20% firepower buffed tank from Lash. I'm still able to survive barely. Which again is obviously very valuable, you know. Being a 1 HP recon is not much different than being a full HP recon past the early game where you could be harassing infantry. So even just surviving it all is great. And my opponent actually builds a rockets here. It's a little bit more effective than in standard to build a rockets, but it's still pretty dangerous. It all kind of depends on whether or not you can find out that they have it. This is a very aggressive build from my opponent. That's also, I say aggressive, I mean it's a very costly build that's quite defensive. It doesn't really give you much aggressive power compared to kind of just dropping tanks like I am. I can easily take a fight anywhere on the map, whereas this rocket is more likely to kind of defend this area of the map and is kind of holding my opponent's own properties rather than giving them any real offensive pressure. It's not necessarily wrong, it's just a very different style, and it also limits how much you can get, especially if I don't push aggressively, you know, too deep. I can end up winning around a lot of the map just because I have vehicle advantage kind of everywhere now, because I'm building out a lot of tanks, whereas my opponent is building stuff like rockets, and yeah, it's just kind of like gonna end up limiting them to be far more defensive, maybe committing this amount of money instead of just going for 2 tanks, which can also give you solid defensive power, while also giving you the ability to play offensive if you need to. Finish off this recon with the 6 HP infantry, letting me still capture in this turn. Pretty efficient move. This APC is sitting on my city for some reason, so I just double strike it, finish it off. Go for a hit on this infantry, put it to 1 HP. This is a little bit dangerous, obviously, because my opponent can get a hit from a city for 30%, but I do have a lot of units here, and also I've delighted on vision. Obviously, these infantry are all they have, so they can't actually see anything unless they move an infantry onto the city or somewhere around here to kind of get information. Or maybe they could move a recon out or something, but either way, they don't have much information, so I'm kind of playing around the idea that they wouldn't have vision to get any good counterattacks, but even if they do, I have 3 tanks and an anti-air here, and even a copter if I want to. I feel pretty confident about this location, because it's much easier for me to reinforce it. My black boat is at 3 fuel, which means it won't be able to make it to this port. Very sad, because I'll cap it. Next time it'll be 2 fuel, I'll move off, and then it'll be 1 fuel on that turn I move off, and it won't be able to reach it because I've got to move 1 square. So I am sadly going to lose my black boat. Go for a first strike on this infantry, and another one with the copter. Finish this infantry off with my infantry. Move my recon up aggressively into the woods, because I know it's now safe. Again, it's a little bit aggressive. I do think that, you know, this is definitely something I've had to learn, is you do have to limit your aggression in fog. It can be really easy to, bait yourself into thinking that, you know, you're safe to hit stuff as soon as it shows. And you could easily make the mistake of being too forwards in fog and kind of getting caught off guard by not having the right amount of information. So it is definitely something you need to think about. I've definitely had to taper myself a lot more. I built 2 tanks here on this turn. I'm at 16k a turn now, so 2 tanks a turn is pretty easy. It's a consistent build. My opponent's moving their rockets up. They go for the finish on this infantry, start capturing that city. They did kind of do all this after just seeing this APC get taken down by a tank anti-air. So this is pretty offensive from my opponent, especially because I don't really have the units to kind of cover. This anti-air is sitting in the woods here, waiting for copters to appear. My opponent should have a copter down here, so maybe this anti-air should have moved further down. They should have been aware. They are moving up, picking off some of my infantry, but I've already got the cities, so it's not a huge deal. They go for a first strike on this infantry, which is quite aggressive, especially considering, again, they know I have a tank and a copter in this area. So my turn, move out, get the one shot on that recon, finish off one infantry, move up, get a first strike on this tank. Then I pull my infantry back and I finish it off with the copter. Again, I don't know what my opponent has with regards to like counters here, so obviously they can do a 1, 2, 3, 4... 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and just finish off this copter, but again, it's just like aggressive. You know, my opponent has these things covered, and I see a 2-hit KO, and I think, okay, great, but they do have options. But I do have more vehicles ready to cover, you know, worst case. Go for the interrupt on this infantry, but I think I'm actually pushing up towards this top side. Finish off that infantry from the capture, get the first strike, 2-hit on this infantry, free dudes. We love free dudes. And also block off this tank from getting a first strike, so I have a lot of offensive pressure on the top side. So I am kind of pressuring two fronts at once, which is normally the way you want to go in a turn. You know, if you're going to make aggressive 2-hit KOs like this, it can generally be better to kind of like strike multiple places at once. So where my opponent has like this tank and this anti-air ready to cover, they can't cover everything. So it is forcing my opponent to make choices. But obviously, again, I don't really know how much they have ready. I go for copter tank infantry here. Now I have 17k per turn. This is a pretty smooth 17k build. You can get this out every turn. So yeah, they do get the one shot on the copter. They do get a first strike on my tank. Feels pretty bad, but I did leave a tank here ready to cover just in case. This rocket moves up. You can see the area it's covering is it's covering these two cities. So I can't ever contest these cities now. And you'll definitely see me find that out in the long run. They build another anti-air. They take out their first copter as well, and an infantry and a recon. My next turn, I go for an aggressive capture here on these cities. Pushing up with my infantry. Definitely a bit of an overextend, I think, in hindsight, but... You know, I was just trying to get... I was winning the fights up here, and I have a lot of vehicles at the ready, so I was just trying to get some offensive terrain. It could definitely be... Another aspect of Fog that's quite difficult is you can never really be sure how much you're winning by. Unlike Standard, where obviously you can clearly see your opponent's numbers and resources, you always know when you have an income advantage and you can afford to play slow and build up an army to the point where your opponent can't contest. But in Fog, you don't really have the access to that information, so it can definitely be, you know... I find myself kind of greeding for these aggressive cities quite a lot because I don't really know what my opponent's units are, I don't really know what kind of situation I'm in, and maybe I don't feel like I'm winning, you know? I am 1k up, I'm consistently getting 1k up every turn, I have an 8 unit advantage, I have an army value advantage, but I don't know these things, you know? I just feel like I'm winning fights, so I want to push up and try and get some contested terrain. But like I said, I had a game recently where, yeah, someone just bodied me because I thought I was winning fights, so I pushed up, and then suddenly I got completely eradicated by just a hidden waiting army. So it can definitely be easy to kind of like bait yourself into overextending. Pulling my infantry back into the forest, I bring up the artillery here to cover these tanks a little bit. Start capturing this neutral property, move my tank up into the woods, get my recon on the city, get some healing. Pulling my other infantry up. Get the anti-air in the woods in case there's a copter up here. It's a lot easier for my opponent to get copters up here like it is for me to get copters down here. So I'm kind of... I'm assuming there'll be air input here somewhere. So I'm just having this anti-air in range just in case. But I don't really have much information, you know. I have no aggressive recon. My information is quite limited for sure. My opponent goes for the capture of the city. I don't think they knew it was mine. They just started capturing it. And then they're probably like, oh, this is actually already taken. It's definitely happened to me more than once. They move another infantry down. They didn't see this artillery, I think, at all. They never were able to check this city. So they have the anti-here covering the capture. Probably going to end up sacking all of this because they know the units I have here. So they, you know... I guess they were just willing to trade the city and that was it. Moving all the units up. Go for the hit of this infantry here. Move the anti up. Pull the tank back a bit. And you'll see what they do here, which I actually think is quite smart, specifically. I think it's gone to my turn. Yeah, so if I go to the end of the turn here, I think it's actually quite clever for my opponent, is they don't attack with the rockets. Now, obviously, if they'd hit with the rockets here, I would have totally known that there was rockets here, you know? But what my opponent does, which I think is quite clever, and is always something you could do in Fog of War, is just you don't give your opponent the information. And then, you know, obviously they made mistakes earlier showing me tanks and stuff like this. But in this instance, my opponent does make a great move, I think, of not giving me the info of there being rockets here. They just go for the first strike interrupt, preventing me from getting this city, while they reinforce the area. And then you know, they're trying to ensnare me into thinking like, well, they only have an infantry to defend here, the rest of the units will be back here, I could probably force this city. And then, you know, bam, rockets. They do actually end up building a second rockets here. Again, it's a big commitment. My black boat sinks. Rest in peace, black boat. And it's a lot more oriented towards defense, but maybe my opponent just felt like they were really behind and they had to start making these defensive plays, trying to bait me into the indirects, which is definitely something you can do in Fog. It's very easy to just build defensive rockets and sit them on cities, and your opponent will walk into them without knowing, unlike in Standard. Get the one shot on this infantry here. Should be revealing I have an artillery if my opponent pays attention. I don't know why my tank went like that. Just wanted to show them the HP, I guess. I end up getting the pickup on this infantry. Go for another capture. Moving my units up, walling off the city, so my opponent shouldn't be able to block it, in my mind. Moving my other units up here. So at this point, when I'm looking at the game, I think I'm definitely going too far up here. Once I'm winning the fights, I think, honestly, and I crushed a lot of units up here, I think I should be more confident moving units into this southern area and trying to go for these properties instead, because my opponent's going to have to build responses up here, right? And it's very easy for them to reinforce this area. I think it's fine for me to control this area, but then I should probably just chill, you know, keep a recon up here, keep some tanks up here to, like, hold the line, and then be pushing up on this other area instead. I think it's definitely, poor strategical movement from me overall. But I was quite new to Fog, and you know, I just wasn't fully expecting some of the ways it plays out. Another copter tank infantry turn. My opponent's next turn, they move the recon up, and then BAM! My tank gets one shot. I watched this in the replay, I'm like, huh? I think that's a rockets. So at this point, I know that my opponent has rockets. And I assume they must be on the city because it was a one shot. I think that's the only way she can one shot Von Bolt tank, is if it's on a city with the 30% firepower bonus, but either way, it would have to be either be here or in the forest. So I know there's a rockets in one of these two tiles. Very important to watch the replay of these kind of scenarios and try and address what your opponent did. This copter moves up. I think, did Anti-Air have a vision of 2 or 3? I'm not sure. They finish off the infantry. Tank moves up, gets a first strike. Vision was bugged there, they did have vision. And yeah, suddenly I'm taking a huge blow on my army, and this is what I was talking about, where I feel like I'm overextending, and I definitely am looking at the replay. Because you do always have to be nervous about these kind of defensive indirects that you just can't see until it's too late. But either way, I do get the information that my opponent does have rockets, which does make me more confident about this southern side as well, because it means they've committed a lot of money to having defensives in this area, as opposed to having units down here. So I feel very confident about being down here all of a sudden. My next turn, I move up, get a first strike on this tank. I calced the rocket range that I shouldn't be able to get hit back here. Moving my other tanks up to reinforce. Look, I should have enough units down here at this point to be safe. I'm feeling pretty confident. So don't worry too much. Pick off this infantry, move up, reveal the anti-air, which I saw go into this forest, I think, from my recon in the previous turn. Once again, just looking at the replay, see where your opponent's units move. I'm fine to trade a 1 HP recon for a full HP anti-air at this point, because my opponent's probably going to have to hit this and just sack the recons. I'm feeling pretty fine about that. I moved my artillery to this woods for some reason. This was like insanely aggressive, and I have no idea why I did it, but no, it didn't get punished, so therefore it was a good play. I don't make the rules. Finish. Well, I get another good hit on this tank with the 4 HP tank. Moving my recon down into the center, pulling my units back, just retreating. You know, I totally know this is lost, and I can't fight into the rockets. So while I do get a good first strike, and I have the anti-air in range to hit the copter if it comes in, even though it would be pretty hard, and I probably would have losing the anti-air, but you know, at the very least, I'm pulling my units back because I realize I've definitely gone too far here. My opponent's next turn, I build another copter, another tank infantry, just same build, you know, if you have 17k, it's just useful. So Prime Tactics does come out, they move on to the silo, 6 stars, so it'll probably be hard for me to kill the anti-air next turn. They finish off my tank, they go really aggressive with the copter. So the thing about Lash's air units is they don't actually get any bonus during her super other than the default +10/+10. So this is always something to consider, that you don't have to worry too much about air units getting insanely strong or anything. Unlike Kindle, for example, who does get her day-to-day bonus off of cities on air units. It's not true for Lash. The only air unit buffers are basically all the dual strike COs. In dual strike, they kind of changed their idea about how those COs function, so they made it so, you know, Kindle and Jake and Cole, they all get bonuses even on their air units, but none of the COs before that generally, who are terrain based, will get CO bonuses. To end up finishing off this tank with the second strike, move the recon forward, try to get information, but I have a lot of my units hidden in the forest here, so it's actually kind of hidden from my opponent. So I actually have 3 tanks in range of this, but they can only see 1, so they might end up, you know, thinking they're a little bit more confident than they are. They do end up pushing out aggressively, you know. Obviously they do have the super this turn, but all these units are left on
on low star tiles. You know, this tank hit from the road, which means it's not getting any bonuses. This copter doesn't get any bonuses. This anti-air is in a good position, but it obviously only has one job, and that's hit enemy copters. So if I don't have any of those, which I know I don't have to worry too much about it. But these other units are actually in quite a lot of danger. End up moving the other rockets up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So not really in range to cover anything yet. Build another copter. Yeah, so now they have 17k, so they can go for the you know, the standard build. Good unit count, good vehicles. Lots of options. If you don't need anything more specific, like an anti-air, or you don't want to build indirects, this is just always a great go-to build when you have 17k. So I get a good first strike on this tank. Get some hits on this recon. This lets me walk around and hit this copter. Yeah, it's a little bit aggressive, but worst case, you know, I traded up 1,000. Best case, my opponent doesn't have answers immediately. I end up just moving the recon out into the city, just trying to get more information. Don't end up seeing anything, so I'm feeling even more confident, I suppose. Start capturing my opponent's city here, move the tank once again up into the forest, go in for this anti-air, actually end up finishing it off. And I do end up getting Ex Machina here, and I was thinking, it could be worth using. The thing about missile-based powers in Fog is, again, you don't really know how much value you're going to get. It can be very difficult to judge if it's worth dropping at this moment. I think generally you want to try and keep them when a fight is actually breaking out. And that was kind of my mindset here. You know, I thought for a while, I was like, should I just drop the super and just see what happens? But then I thought, actually, I think it makes more sense for me to wait at least until, you know, I have a little bit more information. I can actually go for an aggressive push. And I also know that my opponent has at least 1 rockets in this area, right? I know they have 1 rockets in this area. So I'm assuming the missile is always going to hit here. Because there's 15k here, they probably have other units surrounding the rockets. So my mindset at this point is, now that I have Ex Machina, my play is to drop Ex Machina on a turn where I can push up and hit the rockets. And then, you know, my opponent's surrounding units will also be disabled and they won't be able to fight back. So that's kind of what I was thinking at this point, is that's how I want to get the value. I've officially wiped out all my opponent's forces on the bot side here, so I can start moving infantry up and just taking these cities. So I'll definitely be pulling a big economy value soon. Moving up my reinforcing tanks and copters. Go for the same build. You know, like I said, this infantry's like stuck here. You know, he's just lost. You know, he had a good run, but he lives on this island now. Opponent goes for the interrupt with this capture. Starts moving the other units up. I see the tank go back here. And this was really interesting to me because at this point, I kind of thought maybe the rocket isn't on the city. This is like one of those things where it's actually like information that I used. I made quite an interesting call here, at least mentally, where I thought, actually, maybe the rocket isn't on the city right now. Maybe my opponent moved the rocket. Because of the way the tank moved, you know, it was here, and it went like 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can see all of this because of my recon. And I'm like, well, if it goes 5, 6, it's going to be sitting on the city. So I actually used this specific move as, you know, I made an educated guess that the rocket had actually moved off the city, which makes it even weaker to like an Ex Machina, because now it's not even got any defensive bonuses, and also it means that I can push up more aggressively and not be worried about these empowered rockets kind of smacking back. So I actually made quite an interesting like judgment call here, because I just couldn't see any other reason why the tank would move this way unless it was trying to get to the city. You know, why would it not just go to the right and just disappear, you know, past these woods into the fog this way? Why would it specifically make this movement? That's actually like a big factor of Fog as well. It's just the way your units move on tiles, and kind of evading enemy vision can be is way more important than it is in standard. You know, just the way that your units move can change a lot of like the information your opponent can obtain. You know, if the tank had moved up here, I would have been like, well, whatever, it's just moving back to retreat. But the fact that it moved like this made me think, okay, actually, I think it moved onto the city because it was low. And I think my opponent has given up the city position with the rockets, which means they're either in the woods or they're just sitting on tiles next to it. And that was kind of all a call I made just from this movement that my opponent made. Yeah, they're building another rockets in the back here. I mean, at this point, I'm really ahead in unit value and unit count. I think my opponent definitely feels like they're losing. So they're just building more defensive indirects, trying to hold the line. And yeah, now that I feel like, you know, these units are no longer in solid defensive positions, you know, while I'm walking up here, I just slam Ex Machina. You know, I'm thinking, you know, I don't think the rockets are on the city. I think they've moved off the city to get, you know, defense, or to let the other units heal, and I think they're actually maybe quite in the open. So I think maybe I can actually push forwards this turn. You know, even if I don't hit the rockets this turn, if they're stuck off the city in the next turn, you know, they won't fire back. And if they're stuck off the city, I can get a free hit on them next turn if I just crush these forward units. But actually, you know, the Ex Machina hits here. I end up hitting 2 rockets, which I didn't even know my opponent had. I'm actually gonna get so much value from it. But it was all kind of made, you know, my whole call to push here was made off a judgment call of like the way my opponent's units moved. Meant that the rockets were no longer in the city. The HP isn't updated because obviously I can't see them in the fog. But these 2 rockets are on 7 HP and got hit by Machina, so they can't move next turn. I just move my recon up super aggressively, try to get as much information as I can, and it also lets me finish off this tank. And then I see it. I see that these 2 rockets are here. I'm pretty sure they both got hit by Machina, so they're both 7 HP, and they can't move. And I think, oh my god, this is so much value, you know? I was even ready to like sack this rocket, or this recon, like whatever, just to get the information, because I know that the missile hit in this area, especially because I saw these units up here get disabled. I know that the missile hit here, I just don't know what I'm running into, so I'm just like, send the recon in, give me the intel, because I'm running them down next turn. And then I just see that I hit 2 rockets with Ex Machina, and the value is just, mwah, chef's kiss. Moving up my reinforcing units. So I have to move these tanks up, because I'm feeling pretty fine about the lower area, moving my copters up. I just know that my opponent has no units down here anymore, they're all congregated in this northern area. So yeah, the 2 rockets are disabled, both at 7 HP, both stock off of solid terrain. This one's on a road, this one's on plains. They move out to finish off my recon. Moving the other units up to defend where they can. Got a mech coming as well. Copter's moving down. Obviously the copter can't hide in the woods, so I do know it's here. And I'm just thinking, you know, go, man. I just start the HQ cap. Go up with my my tanks to open up this this copter, finish that off, move my tank up, finish off these rockets, get a hit on the other rockets. That's, you know, 15k times 2 down the drain for my opponent this turn. Massive monetary loss. Moving up my other units just to defend this HQ capture. Just start capturing these southern cities in case it doesn't work out. You know, I don't even need to win the game here because I'm winning the game down here as well. You know, I'm pulling all my opponent's cities away. Gonna start getting their comm tower soon. This doesn't need to win the game. It can do, and that's why I'm positioning for it, right? But if I don't get the capture, I'm still winning everywhere else, you know? This isn't an all-in play at all. This is just like, I knew I'm gonna win all these trades because there was 2 Ex Machina rockets that couldn't do anything. They had a low HP tank up here that I know about. But I know I'm gonna be dominating these trades, so I'm just, you know, going for an HQ capture as well, because it could be a win con, this could be a way I win the game, but I'm still, you know, safely playing the sides. I'm not just not thinking about the rest of the map or anything. Moving up my reinforcing units, finally got some more copters arriving. Move up another tank. Just to kind of block more ways in from the anti-air, and my opponent just resigns, you know? I don't blame them for this. I think they could have held in this turn specifically. I think they could have prohibited the HQ cap, but it's just they're so far behind. And like I said, it's not about me winning here, it's about me winning down here. It's about me, you know, threatening these cities. And any attempts that my opponent makes to stall this capture, they'll just lose these units, you know? So they're just kind of too far behind at this point. But it can be a hard thing to judge in Fog, you know? You just can't really know how far ahead you are until, you know, your opponent resigns or something like this. So it is definitely really interesting. I really enjoyed this game, and I've been enjoying Fog a fair amount. It's definitely a different style to Standard. I think a lot of what I've learned from Standard has helped me in Fog, but it's still, there's a lot of interesting ideas, especially with how you play around Vision and the amount of information that you give your opponent that definitely affect games. That's why I pointed out some instances, you know, where there were times my opponent gave me too much information, but my opponent also had really good moments of hiding information that didn't need to give me. Stuff like leaving the rockets on the city but not attacking with it. You know, left them opportunities to get bigger strikes down the line because I disrespected the area, assuming that my opponent just didn't have answers. So they definitely, you know, had moments of limiting my info and preventing me from knowing too much. But overall, yeah, I think I just had a smoother capture phase, and I just ended up winning some of the fights. But I definitely think I played way too aggressively at points in this game. Fog is scary, you know? It's scary to push in Fog. And I think it's really easy, and I've definitely got caught off guard more than once by either your opponent baiting you into thinking that you're winning really hard, or you just end up thinking you're winning hard, and you end up going too far, and suddenly you get totally wiped out. So it's definitely an interesting experience. I've really enjoyed playing it so far, and I hope you guys enjoyed this replay review. But yeah, so if you did enjoy it, make sure to leave a like. It really helps out the channel. And you can also subscribe for more content like this. My name has been Snitch, this has been CO Select, and I will see you guys on the next episode. Have a great one. Bye!